I'm delighted to have you all here for this day of discussion. I'm really delighted just to say that there's some of my students here. So Lena sitting there. I said to Lena earlier that there is no student that I have taught this year who hasn't been set the article that she co-authored as reading material. This is her article on state power and breastfeeding promotion. And for me, as far as this research centre goes, it's an important part of our objectives when we organise events, to try and expose students as much as we can to the arguments of the people that they read. So that going alongside our teaching activities, we're very keen to bring students, particularly postgraduate students, into the university research culture and take part in these kinds of discussions. So I'm really glad that Lena's here, other people as well sitting here whose work my students have been reading. So that's an important part of our day. I'm obviously also really delighted to welcome academic colleagues from various bits of the world. The other bits of the world they're from, they're mainly now based at UCL with Charlotte, but they aren't actually living in London. So that's a terrific thing that we've got a spread of countries where we're going to be considering the workings of parenting culture and infant feeding in those countries. But I'm also really pleased that within the programme, we've also got insights from various disciplines. One of the things I'm sure you're all aware, if you're like me and you're running a research centre, that one of the things you're definitely trying to do is to be interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinarity, in my experience, often comes down to just having people talking from their own discipline who happen to be in a room together, which isn't really what I think interdisciplinarity is. And I'm hoping that in the way that we have the programme established today, we can have much more of a genuine dialogue across disciplines around insights generated from those disciplines about different aspects of the subject matter. So that's really important. The third reason for us doing this sort of event, though, which is really at the core of one of the things that the research centre's for, is to try to bring together academics with people who aren't. And that really was one of the main things that I wanted to do with this event today, is to get people in the room who I know from Twitter, basically, not from academic conferences and not from university research environments. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to do that, so that we've got people involved in service delivery, campaigning, industry, in a room together. And I'm hoping that can allow us to have a really good discussion. We try and do an event like this once a year, normally at this time of year, because it's a good time to book a room on campus, because there's not much teaching going on. There's people here who were here last year for sure when we did our event on extending parenting backwards. That was an event looking at the way that the experience of not just pregnancy, but increasingly the experience of non-pregnancy has become influenced by imperatives which say to women that you need to adopt risk-averse thinking and be very careful in relation to how you see the bringing into being of future offspring. And we've had a really good day of discussion about the problems of the workings of that imperative. So there's people here today who will know that and hopefully can enjoy today as well. I did want to mention that one person who spoke at that event last year is my PhD student, Rachel Arkle. People will remember that she gave a really excellent paper about the discussions that are happening around sodium valproate and pregnancy and the pregnancy prevention programme. I did want to mention, just so that we have credit where credit's due, that Rachel has just had a blog published by BMJ Medical Ethics on that subject. If people can retweet that and circulate it far and wide. You know, I think it's a really important area that Rachel's making up, and it really matters, and it's not in any way separate to the issues that we're going to be discussing today. It's certainly part of the whole complex around risk aversion and risk thinking, which very much influences all of this area. I did also just want to thank Rachel. People who know me will know I'm quite good at some things, but I'm very bad at others. And what I'm very bad at is anything to do with tech, and I just have a mental block. So Rachel's done all of that, and it will be lovely as a result. So thank you, Rachel, for your help with today. If that was last year, the subject matter for today very much takes us back to the origins of this research centre. We've been a university research centre for 12 years now. The university has a system where members of staff can apply to set up cross-campus research centres to bring together people working in similar themes and similar areas across the university to develop projects and engage others outside of the university in discussion for no money. So we fund it all ourselves when we do this, as is the way of the modern university. But anyway, we've been doing that for 12 years, but actually the history of the centre goes back further than that. It goes back 2 decades. And that's really the kind of underlying reason for deciding to have today's discussion about the subject of feeding babies. Because it's exactly 20 years since I was doing the research for this. I left some things out there, this document, a write-up of a policy statement and a journal article, which are historic documents from that point when we were doing that research. And really that's the aim of today, is to come back to some of the themes and issues that were raised. I thought it might be just worth me saying a little bit about why we started there. And the reason why we started there is that when I started work here, which was 20 years ago, I did a lot of work with somebody who's now an emeritus professor here called Frank Frady, which came out of this book. I don't know if other people are familiar with this, a book called Paranoid Parenting. Which is a book which has been very influential in terms of all sorts of discussions about the nature of contemporary family life and parenting, and the workings of risk, ideas about risk, and fear cultures. And the research project that we did was really driven out of a chapter in this book, which is called Unclear Rules, Prejudice Masquerading as Research. And what Frank does in that chapter is that he outlines what I think is a very important problem, certainly for anybody involved in the world of research, which is how we understand a situation where something about the way our culture and society is operating now is interacting with research in a way to, I think, bend research out of shape a lot of the time, and to turn research into something which is much more about the expression of prejudice, or you might call straightforward advocacy. A lot of research has become very politicised, it's become very moralised. A lot of researchers, for various different reasons, tend to present their arguments in ways that I think become quite estranged from what research should be properly understood. It's tending to lose its key characteristic, which should be an attempt to be objective, and instead is tending to spin off into realms which I think oftentimes sensationalise, dramatise things, and present things in a way that's very unhelpful. And in this chapter, in this book, Frank discusses that in relation to a whole set of issues surrounding contemporary family life and the raising of children. What he says on infant feeding, one of the things he says, is that the transformation of a practical feeding matter into a huge public issue helps to make parents more anxious about nurturing babies. Since advice is predicated on the latest bit of research, it is by definition unstable and highly provisional. But in a world where every experience seems to give rise to a risk, every health benefit can be potentially linked to some unexpected side effect. Consequently, even mothers who breastfeed are periodically confronted with information that causes them serious worry. And what he was really trying to get across here, I think, and I would say that the last 20 years have really proven his insight, is that unfortunately research, which can only individually generate provisional, fairly limited findings, is all the time becoming interpreted in society in a way that tends to spin out of control and tends to project very anxiety-provoking, fearful messages about just about everything to do with looking after babies, toddlers, teenagers. And I think that this is very influential and very problematic in the world of parenting. So really what we were trying to do when we did our study is to find a way of better understanding the problems of that relationship between research and the wider culture, and have something to say about both the wider culture, but also research, what its project might be, what it's trying to achieve, and certainly to raise questions about a lot of what should be called, it should properly be called advocacy research, rather than what you would properly call objective research. So from my point of view as the director of the centre, that's really the key problem that we've been trying to confront all the way through the existence of our research centre, is to try and make an argument for research being research, and to understand what it is about our culture which is tending to drive so much that provokes anxiety, provokes worry and fear amongst parents and would-be parents, and to try and find a way of making sense of that discussion. So the study that we did on the back of this, which was called Mother's Experience of and Attitudes to Using Infant Formula in the Early Months, was simply to try and gain some insights into the workings of this situation as it works itself out for mothers as they feed their babies. And we did a survey and a set of interviews with mothers who have formula fed their babies early on. And I put the summary of the study out there. We've written it up in various papers over the early years of this century. You can go get one. Yes. It's not interesting, but anyway. So, you know, you can read all of that and have a look at it. But I would say that probably the overall finding that came out of it, which I think is the key one from my point of view, is that there really is a gulf between the issues that confront mothers, which are basically practical, individual, whereby mothers respond to the experience of their babies in their own lives, and the wider context that surrounds them as they do that. And that gulf can create really significant problems. You know, when we did that study, I was actually really shocked by the extent of the problems, actually. There was a set of mothers that we interviewed and talked to who in the write-up of the research we describe as experiencing moral collapse, where they simply could not find a way of making sense of themselves as good enough mothers because they bottle fed their babies. And to me, that's a tragic outcome. Not one that you would want to be happening at all. So really it's how we deal with that gulf between practical questions, and that is the way I certainly see feeding a baby. We can discuss this as we go through. I think it's a practical thing that people have to do. But the problem is the wider culture surrounding it has become, I think, very bent out of shape, and it's certainly not a unique aspect of parenthood. You can see that across all sorts of aspects of being a parent and raising children. So we're 2 decades on now from when we did this study. I think some things haven't changed. I know that Catherine and others responded to a piece of research recently which argued for a causal relationship between bottle feeding and special educational needs in children. a particularly problematic projection of research, which I think would characterise the problem that I'm describing. But for my own part, I would also say the discussion that went on earlier this year around the Lancet series and the way that was projected, and its argument that really the main problem confronting women as they feed their babies is pictures of teddy bears on formula milk cartons or advertising or whatever. I think it's such an inappropriate description of the issues. So we've certainly got that problem going on. But the main thing that I think has changed in the 20 years since we did this study, which is great, is that there's plenty of other people responding to this now. Because when we did this research 20 years ago, we set up an invitation discussion to discuss the research, trying to get together 15 people in a room to talk about it. And it was actually very difficult to find people to invite. We were really pretty much on our own, raising some of these issues, and that is no longer the case. And probably the thing that I really wanted to do today, and one of my main motivations in setting this up, as I say, was to invite the various people who I've been interacting with on Twitter, who are now on various panels through the day, to get together and have a discussion about these issues. So that's the background to it. You'll have seen from the programme that the way it works is that we've got 3 sessions. I'll introduce them as we're going along. I'm going to chair the day. But our first panel, what we've got is 2 papers from academic colleagues of mine, Charlotte Fairclough, who set up the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies with me. Charlotte spent several years here as a postdoctoral research fellow, and what she's going to be talking about is one of the pieces of research that she did while she was here with us, funded by Leverhulme, which had as a component part of it looking at feeding. So she's going to be talking about that. And Sunna Simonard-Dottir, did I say that right? I've had the great privilege of being on Sunna's PhD panel, supervisory panel, when Sunna was doing her research about issues around birth and infant feeding. And Sunna's going to be talking to that, and that's focused on Iceland, which is Sunna is going to tell us is considered to be the world's most feminist country. So she's talking about the contradictions there. And responding to these 2 papers is Ella Whelan. Ella was here last year for our discussion and really enjoyed it. In the year in between, Ella's had a baby. And has been commenting and talking quite a lot about issues. There's obviously, she talks and writes about enormous amounts of things, so I'm not saying that's the only reason. But Ella's going to be responding, and then we'll have a little break and then move on to the next 2 sessions. So we've got some people online who are listening in. Hello, online people. And Rachel is now going to take us through the slides, and we'll begin our discussion. Charlie, do you want to kick us off?